Lynn McDonell is from the accountability group. Her specialty is governance, and especially around federation models. So I'm going to hand it over away to Lynn.
First, it's really cool to have been here and to see what a fantastic federation and association you are. I mean, you are absolutely vital and involved in so many things, and I'm so grateful, and I'm so grateful for your hospitality. And I know on the line are, potentially on Zoom, are some provincial board members and maybe some people here and elsewhere considering board work. So I'm hoping that things I might share today might be start of more board members coming into the organization and being here in the future. So I have been a board member or a staff person or a consultant with federations all my working life. And I wanted to, let me just see if we can get this going, and when I press, so I wanted to tell you 4 stories that are about my past with federations. And the first, I'll go way back to 1982. I'm with the YW Federation, and I'm in my office. I'm the director of programs. Like those days you could get these big jobs, and it was a big job for me. And I got a call from the front desk, and there was a woman from Regina wanting to get a break on her fee because she was a Y member. And silly me, I said no. I held the line. I was really tough, and I said no, she had to pay full fee. And I've regretted that ever since. And so the first thing I want to talk about is that that federations are a tent. I didn't get that. I didn't get the ethos that the Y is a community, and I didn't welcome her, you know, as a community member. So way back in 1982, my first experience with federations was, you know, in her view, I don't think she felt very good about the Y afterwards, but I learned a lesson, and the lesson is that when you're part of a federation, there's a culture that you have to get your employees to be aware of, that there's an ethos, there's a philosophy, that there's a community, and that there are ways in which the organization, you know, embraces people. And so I share that with you as my first experience. Fast forward to 2005. I'm asked to observe a board meeting, potentially in order to join that organization, and it's a federation. A disagreement happens between a passionate national board member and a provincial person who, and it was really, I don't remember the details, but I do remember it was like provincial strength and independence, and the other one was kind of national unity and a national view. And what I realized was that not only is it a tent, but there's such passion in organizations that are federations, such passion. And it has to do with the visions of the that need to be reconciled. You need to find a third way. You need to integrate. And I learned that there was much. So the second one is passion. The third incident, 2012. I'm now a consultant, and I was brought into an Ottawa federation. They were pretty cranky at the time. The CEO had finally left, and there was really a relationship sorting meeting, and when I came in the room, like everybody, and they just needed to like share and express, but what I did was, and I guess this was planned, but I turned and I started doing a grid of what the province was structured like, you know, they were a regulatory agency, what they had to do from their regulations, what they needed from the Ottawa organization, what they could do by them, and everybody just watched this patchwork or this puzzle, this quilt being constructed, and I realized that, you know, the challenge and the beauty is, and it's not advancing, is that it's a puzzle. It's a beautiful puzzle, but you have to recognize that there's such diversity in federations, and how you integrate those, that diversity is so key, and so it was like the group saw the system that they were, and they sorted it out, and it was called, it was called a magic meeting by the new CEO, but I think it was just because we took the time to have everybody see the system and see the network. And then let's just go back Yes, we're well ahead here. Okay. Okay, here we go. Tent, passion, the puzzle, and then the final one is just, for many years, I was a volunteer with CPA Canada, the Chartered Professional Accountants, who in 2016, the Federation celebrated the completion of a multi-year unification of the accounting profession. So if any of you here are accountants, you will remember that there were 40 separate Canadian accounting organizations that came together with 210,000 members, and it was just amazing. Like, it was like celebrating that kind of coming together. And if you remember, over those few years after, there was all those advertising campaigns. There was one time where you'd go through the airport and it was just like completely like chartered CPAs and da-da-da, and then there was some really funny and great advertising. But in last year, in June, two of its organizational members gave notice that they wanted to leave CPA Canada and gave 18 months notice. And that's underway now, trying to sort that out. And I realized that federations you have to take care of them. You have to take care of that tent. You have to have everybody pulling in as part of a federation. So when I think about sort of talking with you about sort of your beautiful and successful federation, knowing that it's a tent. Of course, you have lots of passion. There's a puzzle here, and it's a beautiful puzzle of diversity, and that we all must take care, and that includes the members. I did walk around last night, some of you know, and I was asking, being a board member in a federation is about learning to, and I asked a few people to fill in the blanks, and you can, right now, if you want to fill it in, happy to have your answer. But being a board member in a federation is about learning to work as one, learning to collaborate, these are the answers, being open to different opinions, to listen, very true, and meeting different people. Like, a really cool thing about being a member here, and those who aren't members of the board, do consider, like, you meet different people, the leaders of the industry. It's so cool. And it's about, and then someone had a thoughtful last point around, it's not compromise, but it's about being open to ideas, and that the point of the conversation is to come to some new resolution that you might not have otherwise. So if anybody wants to shout out a different answer, being a board member in a federation is about learning to, or about, and we'll hold it there, just for time. You had your chance. So board work, I'm going to talk about it in 3 ways, and this also applies to provincial associations if any of you are watching. One is that you have a corporate governance function. So those are the official functions of the organization, in terms of its corporate, as a corporate body. And then there's this leadership in a federation piece. And this is really where the competencies, if those are good answers that I had last night. And I'd like you to even go further in those competencies about what leadership in a federation really involves, because it is actually an over and above competency than most business boards have. And often not-for-profit boards. Federations are actually very amazing creatures. And then, of course, on the right is indicating, one is a nursery, and there's a point at which, and I know there's lots of different types, growers, et cetera, and landscapers, but sort of there's a point of decision where the individual business member has to say, yes, I'm in, I'm going to pay and be a part, or I'm not. So you have a common cause to keep those folks in the tent, and then also you see the climate change. So the governance and board responsibilities are, and this would be true for any, TELUS or Bank of Nova Scotia or any organization. And it's so obvious, but it's so profoundly important for everything, is that when you incorporate an organization, real people have to take responsibility, because they can go out and hire employees and borrow money and so forth. And you have to have real people take charge and be responsible. And they can't be employees who can just, say goodbye and leave. It has to be a board. So the board is really the directing mind, and they take that responsibility. So that's why it's a unified, it is the entity, when you're together as a board, you are an entity in charge. And there has to be that real, has to boil down to real flesh and blood people. And there's a accountability and a obligation to take the purpose, which is your objects, to future and impact whatever that is. And in your case, it's a prosperous industry. It's a recognized, valued, and utilized by the public. That your products and services and so forth are, they have economic and environmental and lifestyle benefits. So this is the big arrow that you all are moving in, all of the members, all of CNLA's, everybody. And the board accountability is to make from A to B as smooth, resource efficient, relevant, as possible. And we'll come back to that arrow later. Now, I was asked to speak about governance, and of course, you have to sort of at least nod to these important board responsibilities. They are true for any board. Identity and direction is the strategy and the oversight of management and operations, et cetera, et cetera. And I will provide you through the follow-up from the leadership conference is that you're going to get a very full description of underneath each one what the board duties are, how it populates into your board work during the year. So there's a handout that takes each one of these and says, here's the various tasks under each one of these responsibilities. So we won't go into it today because we don't have the time, but this is like the top of the mountain, and then or maybe not, it's not the best. Everyone is like the tip of the iceberg, but that there is, there's some real content under each one. As you can imagine, financial oversight and stewardship has some pieces to it, et cetera. And sometimes when we go, this is a much, condensed version of something I do at more length, but I often use this visual to explain the difference between management and the board. And you can sort of see which one do you think is the board, which one do you think is management. Well, of course, management is on the wall. So if you imagine that this metaphor is that the wall is strategy, is sort of what the plan is, then management is going up the wall and needs to be able to exercise that judgment as to where the next handhold should be, what the capacity is, what stretch is possible, making real-time decisions at the real time to kind of get up the wall. And they need that flexibility. And there's lots more we could say about that. The board, on the other hand, if we think about it as the woman on the ground, what she has, the board has the advantage of that big picture. And their responsibility is to provide encouragement and support, making sure that it is, that the person is well equipped. They're very mindful of risk aspects. That's probably the main reason why they're there, in case something happens, but in this metaphor anyway. And to provide that kind of support and overall. They may see something coming in from the side or the horizon, or they may see some of the shifts have happened at the top of the wall where we were going. It needs to be adjusted. I had one person in a session say, they might say it's the wrong wall. Yeah, so that's true too. So roles and perspectives, we won't spend too, but I think it's good for you to know that the board's role, those other, that list we just looked at, is a distinct and different role. And in your organization, you have a lot of participation. That's great. So when you put on those hats, be it committee chairs and so forth, in many ways you're on the wall in that capacity. You're working up the wall of your committee, but the board role is really that big picture one. Now, because you're a federation and because I've looked at your website and I've looked at your board of directors on the website and I see you have name tags and the name tags say representative of, et cetera, that I'm going to tackle this leadership in a federation piece because it returns us to some conversations today, but hopefully in a fresh way. So you have your corporate responsibilities, everybody does who's in an incorporated, and that is the CNLA organization. You also have this leadership piece, and those arrows along the bottom are really the 10 entities, including CNLA, who are joined as in a coalition in a common cause. But in the context of a federation, this is a very common challenge, is to have, do hats management. On the one hand, you're a director, on the other, you're perceived as a representative. And of course, you know which one I'm going to say trumps which one in the boardroom. Of course, it's the director. So let's unpack that a little bit. So in good governance, representative is only of a perspective. It's a setting, a standpoint. In the boardroom, you're not voting, you're not speaking for or voting for a member. You can represent sort of what it's, you can say what it's like in the province and how something might be experienced, but your regard will be as even-handed for your own province or your own setting as it is for, across the country, is that you have this kind of evenness of consideration, because you have to be mindful of all stakeholders, taking in all perspectives and making the right decision for the entity that's in your charge, this meeting right now. And this is really challenging especially because I sometimes see when you're representative, I sometimes see it like a tether, like you've been nominated, well, no, you've been more than nominated, you've been appointed is the words I think you use. So you come to the table of the CNLA, and of course, your province is going to expect you to represent them, and you do in terms of sharing sort of what the setting is, but but in many ways you're reminds me many years ago, somebody told me, Lynn, you've got lots of ideas, but you need to be kind of a cool medium. You can't be a hot medium. And I said, what do you mean by that? They said, well, it's just that when you are too passionate, it can distract. And in a way, when you are at the table of the board, you are kind of dialing down your not loyalty, it's the emphasis you're telling people, but you're watching that you're not over championing it, because you have an obligation to champion PEI, to BC, to Saskatchewan, to Ontario, this even-handedness is part of what being a wonderful federation board member is, that you're able to speak about your province, but you are able to do so in a manner that comes, that is even-handed. And so you might say, well, what happens if you're on the other board? If you're on the other board, then which fiduciary responsibility applies? Well, I've asked this of lawyers in the past, and the main thing is that the entity of which you are at the table, and that's why that directing mind becomes so important, that you are a singular entity at that point. So you're part of that organization that is that directing mind. You are that. You are a CNLA board member. And when you go back to the other organization, you have to reconcile, and you can have a conflict of interest, of course, but see great board members, if you cannot reconcile the two and have ideally an opinion and a perspective and a vote indeed that spans both, then you sometimes have to let one go. So they only ask the best people to come forward to be if there is an interlocking board. But your legal fiduciary responsibility comes first for CNLA and the board that you're sitting on. Another helpful distinction is to draw the distinction between a customer and an owner. So board members, members are shareholders, members are owners, if you like, of the organization, and they elect the board, and then the board is now the representative of those members, and so they have to have a owner perspective, not a customer one. And I have been in many board meetings where you have provincial people who are unhappy with programs that are running or something, and that should be sort of taken to operations as a client or as a customer, but at the table they're thinking about, what are things set up to do? What is the big picture? So an example might be, as a customer beneficiary, you expect a benefit, so that's fine. But I couldn't go into A&W, for example, and say to A&W at the counter, I couldn't say, I really like Italian food. Can we start having Italian food here? Because I really like Italian food at the A&W. Because I'm a customer, I can decide to, take that service or product or not. But as an owner, representing all owners, if I was at a board of A&W, I could ask such a question, but it would be then in the context of, what the service or product, who is the market? Like, is it something that we have capability to do? Are we set up in our kitchens? How can we best, allocate our limited resources? So the difference between a customer and an owner is pretty key. So, discipline required of owners to represent all owners' interests and to balance issues and all stakeholders versus what's in it for me. And the last one is interesting too, because there's this concept of, it's in policy governance, but it, of course, is in the back of our minds as well, is that we have moral stakeholders. We have folks who are not in the room, but they depend on us. So there would be a whole bunch of constituencies that boards have to take into account as part of their good governance and good civic responsibility in this world. So for example, this invisible stakeholders might certainly are, the communities that you serve, all these other interests. And so the board isn't just focused on the official membership. It also has, an obligation to take into account other stakeholders if they indeed have stake. So I was looking at your meeting minutes and your annual report, and I said, oh my goodness, you're so alive. And bravo, you are a fantastic federation. You are very successful, and you just are brimming with energy, and the volunteerism in this organization is fantastic. And I saw this kind of swarms and bees and I've got some different nature metaphors there, and saying that it's fantastic what you're doing, how many topics you're involved with. And the middle one is that the leadership then in governance, and this goes back to, my early learning that I shared with you, understanding there's a tent, there's a passion, there's a puzzle, and there's a care, is to see the system, that you as a board, the best thing, if you are, many of you, fantastic board members for a federation, you see the system, you're going to cultivate alignment. Like that alignment, which is this arrow, which is from A to B, is your charge. Every member has a role to play, but the National Federation in particular is trying to cultivate that alignment. They're trying to manage those interdependencies and that diversification. They're trying to find the process for sufficient consensus all the time, and doing and enabling, creating this platform for self-organizing and exchange. And I saw it this morning. Like you're saying, well, do we need to do some work on this? Can we get some people to work on that? And to nurture the spirit of the federation and avoid toxins. And what are toxins, do you think, in a federation? What would toxins be? Well, they'd be politics, they'd be bad actors, they'd be hidden agendas, they'd be results at all costs. You want instead to really nurture that spirit, put up that tent and keep it strong. And on the right-hand side, that sustainable prosperity for 400 some members, I don't see it from here, and stakeholders, and then that, you want that point of decision for membership, and you want to sort of do something on the bigger picture. So the common cause then really is about being effective in moving together, doing your corporate governance work, yes, but also seeing the system and really, searching for and finding that alignment. So I have a new passion, and it really is about preparing ourselves for the future. And one of the reasons, and some of you know this because I've said it to numerous people here, is that one of the reasons why I'm really excited about meeting you is because I think that you have a role to play over the next decade in preparation for bigger changes to come. So the Federation then, you need that longer view, and here in the room, and especially the national board, the CNLA, has to ask questions like what challenges will be encountered, how will growing conditions change, how will economic business landscape evolve, what about climate change? So I'm thrilled to hear that you're on it. And leadership is foresight and helping others advance. And governance then, and this is the key, is governance really sets the conditions for other good things to happen, for that thriving. That governance kind of creates that container for that whole federation to work and to have that impact, to have that wonderful outcome that you're looking for, that prosperous, valued industry, providing benefits, getting recognized, utilized by the public. That's the North Star. And you have network assets. So now when I look at federations, I look at any organization, I kind of see them less as structures like formal structures forevermore. I see that more like assets that can be reconfigured in new ways for the future. And I'm thinking if there's business members here who are not involved, but maybe could be, is that, you're part of the story too. It's not just the formal organizations, it's every member being called to develop the best they can be in their own setting, which is always going to be diverse and different than anyone else's. I once talked, and I'll wind up soon here, but I once talked to a chair of a board, and I said to the chair, what's the most important role of a chair? And he said, the most important role of a chair is to draw out the best of the board in every decision and in every person. And I thought, that's a good answer. And I'd say for federations, what's the magic of a federation is to draw out the best of every member and every business member, every individual member, and have them be the best they can be for the impact that can be had. So everyone in the leadership, everyone in a federation, from CNLA to the provincial associations to the local member, has a leadership role over the next period. I'll end up with 3 kinds of board members, at least. These are 3. I think you can see where I'm going with this. So sometimes, you have a board member and they are always coming cranky to the board. They have issues and they unpack those, and they always see the glass half empty, or how about the bowl half empty, and they take a lot of energy to manage. And then you have a board member who is looking around to sort of see where the conversation's going, and they want to be sort of on that bus, and they are not sort of independent and giving their own views and coming up with their own angles. And they're not the most valuable member of the board. And of course, the last and beautiful dog there is the German Shepherd, who's loyal to the cause, who's protective, who acts when necessary, who is, sees their role as standing up and protecting something. And so it has been great to meet you all. That is it. Oh, I do have something for the chair, and I'll put it at your seat, which is it's a placemat. What do you call these? Coaster. And it says, let's shift board conversations to the new reality. Thank you very much, everyone.
So Lynn and Nancy and Jennifer will be around during the break here. And I think you're all joining us this evening.
Not me, but...
Oh, okay. So break for her, dinner for those two. And we can ask some questions then. I'm sure some questions and some directions will come out too from the next couple of days of board meetings. Thank you very much, then Lynn. Really appreciate it. And we'll be back to reconvene at 3:30.